On the weekend of June 16th through the 18th, 1967, a group of musicians, including John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas and concert promoter Lou Adler, put together what would become known as Monterey Pop, a festival celebrating the San Francisco music scene and was sort of the unofficial kickoff of the Summer of Love. Acts included Canned Heat, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Country Joe and the Fish, Al Cooper, Butterfield Blues Band, Electric Flag, Steve Miller Band, Moby Grape, The Byrds, Eric Burton and the Animals, Booker T and the MGs, Ravi Shankar, Buffalo Springfield, Grateful Dead, and the American debut performances of Jimi Hendrix Experience and The Who, and the first major public performances of both Janis Joplin and Otis Redding. It was a landmark music festival drawing up to 200,000 people over the weekend, and it would have gone down in history as just something to be remembered if it wasn't for the remarkable foresight of filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker and his team of filmmakers and sound technicians who captured the event and created the template for the rock concert documentary known as Monterey Pop. I spoke with filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker earlier this month about how he became kind of the unofficial go-to guy when it came to rock concert documentaries. His other credits include Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars and Depeche Mode 101. His political documentaries include the landmark The War Room, chronicling the 1992 presidential campaign of Bill Clinton. He's a terrific filmmaker and has a lot of stories to tell. So here is my unedited, complete interview with filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker. What drew you to filmmaking?
To filmmaking? Well, I was an engineer. I was studying engineering at college, and when I came out, I of course got a job in an engineering company, and I found that it was very boring because you really weren't asked to design or make anything. You did everything out of a book with numbers in it. So it was kind of, you designed a bridge by putting down what somebody else had already done years before. So I quit that job, and I didn't quite know what to do. And then a guy named Francis Thompson, who was a filmmaker, showed me a film he'd been working on for many years called NY, which was a very abstract film. I think the Museum of Modern Art now distributes it. But when I saw it, I'd kind of been wondering what I should do if I wasn't going to do engineering, and I had half thought of writing and maybe even painting because I really liked pictures. And when I saw the film, the rough cut of what he had done, I knew right away that he'd done it by himself, that he hadn't had a big lot of people doing it, and that I had no idea you could make a film by yourself. And when I saw that, that was it. I never had any further thoughts about anything from then on.
Well, in one of your early credits I read, and I just find this totally fascinating, you have a screenwriting credit for one of Norman Mailer's movies, Wild 90?
Well, we didn't. Nobody wrote anything. Norman invented it as we went along, and I was filming it as he invented it. So I suspect that somebody decided that was a creative generality to say that I'd written it. But no, there was nothing written on that, or almost any. I have tried to write things, and they're not bad. They're okay, but they're not nearly as interesting to me as things I find as it were a discovery. And so that's filmmaking to me is more going out without a script to find out what's there that can amaze you, that can really interest you.
Right. Well, before we get to the documentary, I got to ask one more Norman Mailer question. What was that? How did you two hook up, and what was that collaboration like with Mailer, who was trying to do the freeform style of writing? He was trying to translate that into film. Yeah. To film, and some would argue
Not very well.
and a lot would argue unsuccessfully.
Well, the thing about Norman is, no matter whether you disagreed with him or not, he was so inventive and so interesting that you kind of didn't want to be, you wanted to be around to see what he would do, what would happen. And that interested me because as a filmmaker, I thought, the thing that films lack, they have a certain kind of brand of person that tends to make them. So they're all kind of similar. They're like magazine stories, there's magazine fiction. It all has this kind of arc of beginning, middle, and end that's so similar that you almost can't tell one from another. And what I thought in filmmaking, if you could get somebody like Norman, who's kind of a renegade, and ready to burn forests behind him, if you could get him interested in making a film, it would be an interesting film. So, but I had known him slightly. That is, in New York City, if you're in a certain group, you always run into certain people, either in bars or parties or elsewhere. And he had a friend that worked with him, Jose Torres, who was a boxer that I knew too, that I liked very much. He wasn't trying to teach me boxing, but he showed me what boxing was like a little bit, and what it did to you as a person. Anyway, when Norman called me one day, and he was doing a play downtown at this theater way down in the village, the Theater de Lis, I think it was, and he said that and he was in a bar with Buzz Farber, who was the guy that worked with him, and they said, they were doing this funny spiel in which they would talk to each other as if there were not really memorized lines, but kind of lines that you'd make up as you went along to show a certain attitude. I mean, they were. I had no idea what they were. They were clearly not. They weren't really talking to each other. They weren't. They were listening to each other, but they weren't informing each other about anything that seemed to me you could get your hands on. So I listened for a while, and then Norman said, what we're doing is we do this thing all the time in bars, and we pretend we're the Gallo brothers, or we pretend we're somebody, and we try to talk not so much the way they talk, because they weren't trying to imitate an Italian mafioso person, but they were trying to kind of set up an image of what their world was like, which is peculiar, and that's not probably a very good description, but it intrigued me. And then Norman said, we'd like to make a film with you, and I had already made Don't Look Back, which had some success, although hard gathered, I'll tell you, because nobody would distribute it in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so they said, why don't we do a film? So I said, well, let's experiment first, because it's a little complicated, and I'm not sure that I see how to do it. But I had a loft, and we blacked it out and put some lights in it. And Bob Newirth did the sound with the Nagra, and I did a camera. And one night, Norman and Buzz and another guy who's a friend of ours, who's an actor, the three of them did this, and it was later called Wild 90. And exactly what it was, I was never sure, because it was clear they weren't trying to imitate the Gallo brothers as such. It wasn't put on as a piece of theater about the Gallo brothers. It was really Norman Mailer pretending to be not Norman Mailer, and be somebody else. Who it was is not totally clear. But in the course of it, I found it really interesting, because you had to film, them as if they were actors, as if there was a script, when in fact there was no script. So you had to kind of figure out where they were leading each other, and who was going to answer next, and how much time you were going to give it with the camera before you went back to the other. In other words, it was a whole piece of theater that the camera had to figure out as well as they did. And in the course of it, at the end, Norman looked at me and proceeded to make up a poem right in front of the camera, which really startled me. I had never had anybody do this before. And I remember as he went, I thought, well, I got to do something to make this a little dramatic. So I sort of circled him with the camera, and he turned as he went and finished the poem on camera. And I had no idea whether this was a piece of good movie making or whether this was a good poem or anything. It just was so new to me and so interesting that I kind of got intrigued. And from then on, we did a couple more similar but much more complicated attempts at doing this.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. You brought up the Bob Dylan film, Don't Look Back. What came first in your interest, music or politics? Because those two topics seem to be the overriding themes in your documentaries. What came first for you?
Well, I think I'm like anybody. I'm interested in what's going on at the time. You know, if there was a political rhubarb going on, I was intrigued by it and talked to other people about it, and we thought, you know, we tried to venture what each of us kind of thought about what was going on. Or if it was music, I just like everybody else, I had records and I listened to them, although my records tended to be older. I was really into jazz, and I had a lot of 78 records of jazz from the 20s and 30s, which I listened to a lot with my roommates. We all listened to that music, Benny Goodman, Fletcher Henderson. That was what we listened to at night as we drank beer and stayed up all night. So when Albert Grossman came and asked me if I wanted to make a film with Bob Dylan, I'd heard of Bob Dylan. I think I might have even heard one of his songs on the radio, but I certainly was not familiar with him. And this was not music that I listened to a lot. I didn't hesitate. I said, okay. He asked me if I'd like to go along with him to England and make a film with his client Bob, and I said, sure. And it was sort of as simple as that. I didn't think it through much. I didn't know what to expect. But it was like going into the unknown with a camera to see what I'd find.
Right.
And it wasn't that I was interested in the music itself, but since Bob was a musician, that was the way the film had to be structured along musical lines. But I didn't want to make it a musical film, although I wasn't sure what for me, a musical film was, something like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, or even my favorite was who was the guy that he married all the beautiful actresses in Hollywood before he was through. He had a wonderful wry voice.
Right. I know who you're talking about.
And he would sing in a lot of his films, which were all about. He kind of looked like a 12-year-old in some ways. I just can't remember his name now, but he. The films were always about the high school was going to have a big show or a dance, and in the end, he and Judy Garland were...
Mickey Rooney.
Mickey Rooney. I loved the way Mickey Rooney sang, and I liked the way he approached music, which was kind of, it was like he was illiterate in music. He just sort of made it up as he went along. And I liked that quality, so I kind of looked for it in Bob, because I had no idea how accomplished a musician was or anything else. But you could see that that was a thing he had a sense of how to do. That it didn't occur to him that he wasn't doing it right.
But I'm curious about that. I'll got to ask about Don't Look Back real quick. In that, when you were making it, I mean, it's now obviously 40 plus years later since it came out, and it's been revered, and it's like people study it meticulously, and
yes, they write long theses about it.
Long theses. There's that great section in the Todd Haynes movie, I'm Not There. That's basically a reinterpretation of it. And so I'm curious, when you were making it, when you were in the moment, did you ever have a moment awareness of, this is something a little more than just chronicling Bob Dylan on this tour? Or did all that awareness just come later after the movie was out?
You do, as you're doing anything, whether it's painting your house or fixing your car, you have moments of wondering, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Why is this subject to my doing as opposed to anybody else's? And in the course of filming Dylan, I had been very aware and interested in a copy of Byron's letters. Well, they were letters to and from Byron, which an English guy had published, and it was called the Pizan Chronicles. And it had to do with Byron fleeing England because he had kicked out, there was a nasty divorce, or somebody was suing him for raping their daughter, or I don't know what it was, but he left England, probably forever, and went to live in Italy with Shelley. Mm-hmm. And the two of them set up in this big household a kind of, it was a little like San Francisco. All the heavy hitters, Trelawney and people like that in England, would come down there to hang out because that was where the action was for them. And so he became a kind of star, a rock star abroad. And the thing that was interesting was he was a person who, when he was younger, was not very good looking and had a club foot of some sort. He had a foot that he had to limp on. But when he was the rock star, he had shoes made that made him limp even more. In other words, he took everything a little further than it was, and he made it interesting to people. There was a kind of poetry about it. And of course, he was a major poet, as it turns out. He was probably the last great poet. From then on, the Russians came in and started writing these knockouts novels, as did the French. And poetry was no longer what everybody had to buy. They started buying novels. And so he was kind of the end of some sort of period. And I kind of saw that in Dylan, that Dylan marked the end of a certain kind of music, which everybody got used to, and it was perfectly good music. It was it was all the music that was in Broadway shows or on the hit parade on radio, and it was all kind of Moon June, and sometimes it was well played by great terrific bands. Sometimes it was written by Gershwin and people who were really good songwriters. There was nothing wrong with it, but it never was very important to you. It was something you just listened to. And suddenly here a guy was coming along who said, look out, your life depends on this. And it had to do with the 60s, with the Vietnamese War, with a lot of things that had never been made, that never were public before. I mean, people, didn't get excited about things like that the way they suddenly did in the 60s. I mean, the kids were willing to have themselves shot, or flee to Canada and reject their country forever. And that was kind of a new thing for this country. And suddenly here was this music that was somehow about it. And right. Dylan was the progenitor of that. He was the godfather of that. He said, if it's important to you, make a song about it, not if you can make a popular song and make money. And it was kind of the opposite to what the Beatles were doing. And the Beatles were so intrigued by Bob that they started trying to do it too. I mean, everybody sort of tried to do it. And what's interesting is how long Dylan has been able to capture the central position of that kind of music. It still baffles me. I'm intrigued. And I don't think it has to do with the film particularly. I think the film was simply, I was there when somebody was doing something that's now history, and so everybody wants to know what happened, and all they have is a few films and a few things that have been said or sung. But I was fortunate to be there. I don't think I had any special insight into filmmaking because I had never studied filmmaking and I had learned it all on my own. But I think Dylan gave me a sort of perch on which to try to leave out what wasn't important and leave in what was. And that, of course, is always what good writing or music is about.
Right. Well, and was it from the Bob Dylan documentary that you got, Monterey Pop? How did that?
No, Monterey Pop was almost the opposite of that, in which I didn't want to have any social connections with anybody. I wanted to be pure music. I didn't want to interview anybody. I didn't want to find out anything about drugs or what kids were thinking or any. That was for some other kind of filmmaking. I wanted this to be like you put on a LP record and you get a huge glass of beer and you sit down and you just listen. Mm-hmm. And you listen to why Hendrix is not like Otis Redding. You know, what each of them knows and what each of them can do, and you just listen to that. So I wanted the film to be a very existentialist kind of film that you only found out about each song as it went along. Right.
Well, and from what I've read, Monterey Pop was pretty quickly put together. I think it was a 7-week. It was like 7 weeks from the idea to when the festival took place.
Yeah, it was. Well, Lou Adler and John Phillips really put it together. I mean, somebody called me up, actually, who later had nothing to do with the thing, and said, would I be interested in doing a film about a music festival in California? And at that point, there was a film going around called Endless Summer, which people thought was about surfing. And when I went to see it, I realized it had very little to do with surfing. It was about California. It was about, the Beach Boy language, whatever it was something everybody wanted to find out more about. So the idea of going to California really intrigued me. I'd never much been there before in my life. So the idea of making a film there about something as abstract as music I thought was a terrific idea.
And I guess ask about a few of the performances and if you have a memory or what do you remember logistics.
Sure. I remember it all very well. Well, as well as you can remember that long ago.
Well, I got to ask on top of the Otis Redding performance, which is not only the highlight, for me anyway, it's the highlight of the movie, but, I mean, it's one of those iconic moments. Otis Redding became a star, literally.
Yeah, and then went into the lake.
Right. So, what do you remember of recording that performance and like those occasional moments when you don't know something, but did you know when you were recording Otis Redding that this is going to be something special?
Well, I hope so. Dylan and I had gone to see Otis at the Go-Go in Los Angeles, and that was the first time I'd heard him in person. And he had that fantastic group behind him with those horns, and it was incredible. And then he came over to the table, and Dylan said, "I'll write a song for you," which in fact he did later. He wrote, I forget which one it was, but Otis never recorded it, either because he wasn't alive anymore or he just never got a chance. Who records what is decided in small, smoky rooms somewhere, not at tables in the Go-Go. But when I heard him, I thought he's fantastic. But I didn't think of him being at that festival because I thought this is going to be pretty much a white bread festival. It's Los Angeles hotshots and San Francisco hotshots kind of meeting and duking it out somewhere. And it's not going to be a huge. I mean, nobody had ever really filmed a festival as far as I knew before. I at least never had seen one, except I had seen bits of the festival that was done years before at Newport, but it was a jazz festival, in which what I remember, I saw chunks of it, and I don't know why they were chunks of it. I don't know why I never saw the whole film, because it was music that did interest me. But they didn't play whole songs. They played parts of songs or bits of riffs and things. And so I thought, well, this is like the heart of the concerto. You're not going to be benefit from seeing the whole thing because they don't want to take the time to do it. So unless you went to the movie, you're never going to know what happened there.
Right.
And in this case, I thought what I want to do and I remember going up there with John and Lou, and sort of it was a place where they had horse shows and farm fairs there. You know, it was not a big arena or anything, and they sort of put up a stage, and they had enough space to put a lot of seats. Mm-hmm. So they had, I think they could 4,000 or 5,000 people. I don't think, it didn't seem to me they were going to have many more than that. So it seemed like a reasonable arrangement, and you'd have enough audience to have the bands could play to them. So it would sort of work. And so I just went up with 5 or 6 people that I knew who all listened to music. They were basically as close to being musicians as you could be, but they also knew how to run a camera, which seemed to be a better idea than trying to teach cameramen about the music. And we just sort of took off every morning, and everybody went wherever they were going to go. I think I had Mal Maisels with me, and Jim Desmond, and Nick Proferis, and Ricky was there. There was quite, we just sort of hung out with everybody, and then we shot each performance in a very reasoned way. I mean, I had only so much film that I knew I couldn't shoot every performance of every song.
Right.
I didn't have, I couldn't afford to, and it was unclear exactly how much, what the budget was. They had said just make a film, and they didn't know. John and Lou really didn't know what the cost of filmmaking was, and most people didn't, because we didn't do it the way it would be done classically. We just each person had a camera and a person tied to him with an agra, and as much film as he could carry, and he just went out and shot. And when he ran out of film, he had to come back and cry until somebody gave him some more film.
Right.
So it was kind of it was sort of an uncertain way to proceed, but I didn't know any other.
Right.
And generally, it's amazing. I was amazed at how well it worked.
Mm-hmm. Well, another one of my favorite performances, and it's not in the film.
But when you were talking about the Otis, there was that moment when I kind of lost him in the limes, in the lights, and I can never fully explain why I did that. And I know Robbie came down from Woodstock and complained to me about why was I drifting away from Otis when I could be filming his face, and I didn't. But that was when I edited that was when he was killed. And I remember looking at it and thinking, there must have been some reason for doing this, beyond me. And so I left it in the film. I didn't cut it out of the film. And a number of people who, I don't know what they were, there's some sort of religious people of some sort, who said they could see in that something of the future in that he was going to die.
Right.
Which was really bizarre. I certainly had no intention of being the person that did that. But it was a funny thing to do, and normally I would have cut it right out of the film because we had 4 cameras shooting and we could have easily done it. But I left it in, and at the time there was a lot of people that thought it was very bad taste, that I would do this. But later everybody got to like it, and pretty soon people were doing it in other films. So it had some funny aspect that drew people to it.
And like I said, one of my favorite performances, and it's not in the film. It's now an extra, one of on the Blu-ray and the DVD. Al Cooper, which was a midday Saturday performance.
Yeah, and, I know.
I'm curious about that, and I'm curious when you saw that, when you were making this, putting together the extras for the DVD.
Yeah.
Did you ever think, this probably could have gone in the film?
Yeah, it could have, and I still am not sure why. I was making that film very fast. I wanted to. I don't know what was. I think we didn't have any money. We were doing it all on our kind of on our credit cards. In fact, so it probably I was trying to get the thing out as fast as I can, and nobody knew quite what it was going to be. ABC had funded it, or funded the festival, with the understanding that they were going to be able to run this on the air, and that what Tom Moore's favorite young American couple, John and Michelle, would somehow be the hostesses and host of it. It didn't work out because when they saw Jimi Hendrix, they said, no, you can't go on the air. We can't do that. And they were right. For their audiences, Jimi Hendrix was very was over the top.
Right.
So they turned it down as a TV show, and we were stuck with having to try to get our money out of it that we put in shooting and in editing it. And so I blew it up to 35. We got a couple of lawyers that worked out an arrangement whereby we would have the theatrical ownership of the film for some. I don't remember what it was, but Lou, at the time, Lou said that one of the bookkeepers had run off with all the cash from the show, so he couldn't pay me any more anyway. So he was happy to dump it, I think, at the time, because he didn't think anything was going to come of it. And so we finally put it out and distributed it ourselves. We couldn't get a distributor to even look at it. You know, they said nobody's going to go to a film with just music in it. There's no reason for that. So we put it out, and of course it was a big success right away, because everybody hung out, and they would sit there smoking their tokes and looking at this stuff. And the theaters, we had a couple of old porno houses, one in New York, and it ran for a year there. You know, it just, they couldn't stop it. And it was kind of marvelous because it really confused people who understood about how film distribution worked, because this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. But from then on, we got a group of theaters all over the country that were ready to anything we did. And so when we did Keep on Rockin' up in Toronto, they all put up money for it.
Well, and speaking of the people saying, who's going to come and see this? It's just music. I got to assume you probably were a little amused in the back of your head when you had seen both Jimi Hendrix and The Who, and you realized, I'm sure when you were filming them, you realized, this is not just music. These two guys.
Right. It was good theater. It was incredible theater. That's what people of the music business were all record dealers or whatever, so they didn't get to see much theater. And musicals on Broadway were quite different. They were very studied and very orderly. They didn't dare to do anything or have anything fail. Everything had to be absolutely worked out right. And this was just a complete, it was like fireworks, and that, I think, was interesting for people to see on a screen. They hadn't seen this much in movies. So it was, that audience was a fantastic audience all over the country and all over the world. It played everywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I guess in a weird way, it kind of, in an odd way, Monterey Pop, the 1-2 punch of Don't Look Back and Monterey Pop, kind of solidified you as this kind of go-to person to, if you
wanted to waste money on film, we were the people to see.
Yeah, but if you're a musician and you're up and coming and you want some cachet, they all said Pennebaker, whether it's David Bowie with Ziggy Stardust or the Depeche Mode, and I'm sure considering that you were kind of a little older, elder statesman to the kids, if you will, I'm sure that must have kind of tickled you that that.
Well, it was interesting. I mean, when we did Depeche Mode, a lot of people said, "How can you do this silly band?
Right.
You who have done Bob Dylan, what?" And what they don't realize is that was one of the best films we ever did. We loved doing that film. It was a neat film to do, and really more fun than almost any other film I've done, because all of us were involved in it all the way, and it was like it was quite so different from anything. And we wanted it to be like an MGM musical, like The Wizard of Oz or something,
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a crazy thing to try to do, but it worked. And in a funny way, the band just loved the idea of doing it that way, and we became great friends, ever since.
And I got to ask two more quick questions. One, I got to ask about Ziggy Stardust. And
Yeah.
so what was that experiment like? I mean, here you are, you know, with Dylan and Monterey Pop, and so you know, that period of music was very transformative, and then here comes the next kind of generation of new type of music, and it's very gender bending and also upsetting the status quo.
Well, we got called on by RCA that had invented this new video disc. It was like I forget what it was called now, but it was an attempt to have a disc that played pictures.
This is like pre-Laserdisc. This is even
pre-Laserdisc. And they wanted a band. They wanted somebody to be on it to sort of help promote it. And since they had a contract with David, or could get one, I mean, they did publish his music and distributed it. So they asked me to make a half-hour film for use on this laser disc or whatever. It wasn't called a laser disc either.
Right.
It was called something else. And that I would do this, and that would be it. And I was doing something else. Actually, I was on a raft in the Mississippi making a film on a bunch of theatrical people from Antioch who were putting on a play down the Mississippi. And that was kind of all engrossing. I didn't have a lot of time off the raft. So at first I said, no, I couldn't do it. And then they came back and said, no, you've got to, it's really important. And it's David Bowie. And I wasn't really sure who David Bowie was. I thought he was another person, actually, the guy that did the glamour rock. What was it called? Oh, God. He was a friend of Bowie's. But
Lou Reed.
No. This is a Brit.
Okay.
Anyway, Mark Bolan.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I thought it was Mark Bolan. And I thought, gee, that's great. I'd love to see him. I can hardly wait because I really loved that he did this something or other. This was called Glitter Rock, and I'd heard about it, but I hadn't seen it. So we flew there, but when we got there, there was some strike of the airline, so it was a while getting there. It was very hard. And we got there the day before the last concert we didn't know he was going to do, we got there on a Friday night or something, so there was going to be a Saturday concert and then a Sunday concert. And what we didn't know was then he was going to call it quits, and he was going to announce it at the Sunday concert. And nobody really knew. None of the band knew that this was going to be the last concert. I assume RCA may have known, but we didn't. So we went to the Saturday night show, and we shot a few things just to make sure, so we could, if we had to alter the lights, if they were going to be bright enough, or I didn't know. But when I saw the show, I thought, this is incredible. This is a movie. This guy, because it wasn't, what he did was so beautifully kind of designed. I mean, he designed every note, every move he made. He was a consummate performer. And I thought, if we can do this as raw as we can make it, so that it looks like some crazed lunatic with a camera had got on stage to shoot it, it would come off. You'd see some of the energy that's involved in it. It wouldn't just be a beautifully sort of presented program. Mm-hmm. And so we put signs in the lobby of the theater that night saying, "Bring your cameras with the flash bulbs and use them as much as you want," which normally theaters don't let you do. So for the performance, it was great. It had these flash bulbs going off all the time, which was just fantastic. And then there were just three of us shot it because I was only expecting to do a half-hour show. Nobody, RCA wasn't interested in doing a movie. And so I shot the whole performance and brought it back and blew it up to 35 and made a film out of it, which in fact we let one of the networks, I think it was ABC, but it might have been RCA, run on the air without even getting releases from the music or anything. Put it on the air, and it was fantastic success. So I knew there was a film that could be distributed there, so I made it, and David came and looked at it, and he liked it, and he came over and helped us mix it. He spent about 2 months here mixing with us, and we got a film together, and then we released it, and it was, a lot of people say, God, I can't believe how badly shot that film is. and in a way, I guess they're right,
Right.
But it's got such energy, and it's so sexy. People go to it, and they come and they say, God, that film is amazing. And if we'd done it in the old traditional way, I think it would have been a little boring.
Right.
But I don't know. David is never boring, so it's just I just like the way it looked, and I like the way, and it's all him. There's hardly anybody else in it.
And just to switch gears now, this is my last question.
Yeah.
I got to ask because, The War Room is one of the great documentaries of the last 20 years. When The War Room came out, I think, people liked it and they liked kind of the inside look, but I think seeing it now, I don't think they realize how profoundly insightful The War Room is. And so I'm curious, with this past election cycle, and it's almost where the War Room was in at a crucial moment of change in the first election of Clinton, in this last election cycle, which was another monumental change in politics.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you felt about, that the mirror imaging of the War Room and then the things you've done recently. But
I think. Again, we did a follow-up to the War Room in the last election, where we went to see what had happened to all the people who had been in the War Room, Stan Freberg, Freeman, all the people that we had known, James Carville, even Mary Madeline, and we wanted to sort of get them to, remember what that was like as things were now at the time. So it was kind of an interesting experiment. It was more of an interview film than a real action movie. But I think what was interesting to me was that people who had seen the War Room and could see that it was a new way to do political filming, where instead of somebody pronouncing what was wrong or right politically, you got the people who made things happen. You saw what they were like, how they reacted to just normal things in their lives, and you began to understand a little bit how politics could work. Not the way it always worked, but the way it could work if people really cared about it and were interested in whatever change was possible. And so I think they made a film. A person we knew who was very moved by the War Room, who and influenced by it, made Amy. I can't remember. Did a film on Obama, and there was a couple of other people who did films on people running, and I think that they were somewhat conditioned by the way the War Room worked. I don't know. I haven't seen the Obama film. I think HBO did it.
Right.
And it's going to be released soon, I guess, sometime. Maybe theatrically, too. I don't know what the arrangements are for it. But the idea that it changed the way people looked at politics was interesting to me, because the old way where, President Taft would get up and make a speech and a lot of people would clap is not very informative historically. I mean, only so much of that will keep you alive.
I guess you could say with that 92 election campaign with Clinton versus Bush, you're really seeing that Taftian approach to politics represented by George Bush and Bill Clinton, kind of as kind of what we've been talking about. There's a little bit of theater in that. And that seems to have gone. That seems to be also, I guess you could say, going back to the Bob Dylan film. There seems to be a changing of the guard going on in the War Room.
Well, I guess so. For me, all the films I've ever done are really come out of my love of theater. You know, going to a theater and sitting in a seat and watching somebody enact something, and understanding that you're not seeing the real people in the story take part in it. You're seeing people who understand what they were up to and know how to project it to make you hear it and think about it. And that movies could do that beyond what the theater could do. It could go to the original people. But it wasn't enough to go to the people who had, let's say, done some deed and then could tell you about it, and all their relatives could tell you how smart they were. And after a while, you got secondhand information, even though it was done with the best of hope, that you could actually, if you were lucky and looked around, you could be in the room when the thing happened. And that's what movies were extraordinary at doing. Nothing else could do that. And nothing else had ever done that. That for the first time, you could watch a guy who was running somebody for president call up somebody and make a move that was going to generate some real interest and maybe make the thing work. You could watch it happen right in front of you. That is such an incredible thing that I couldn't imagine doing any other way. Enacting it later or writing a script about it seems to me it could be terrific, and some people are really good at that. But to me, the most interesting thing is being there when it happens.
Well, Mr. Pennebaker, I know I kept you longer than I said I would. I want to thank you. It couldn't say it better. And I didn't even get to talk about Chris Hegges' Startup.com.
Well, Chris, of course, is my partner, and almost all the films I've made since a company or the Ziggy have been made with her. So she's just as much a part of these filmmaking efforts as I am. You know. Well,
please tell her Startup.com. I think is one of the great documentaries of the decade.
That's her film. Yeah.
I don't think people realize how prophetic that film is.
No, that's a marvelous film. And I think also I like the Al Franken film. I thought was a terrific film.
Oh, it's terrific stuff. Yeah. Well, Mr. Pennebaker, like I said, I want to thank you.
Okay.
It's terrific work, and I look forward to your next film, and you have an open invitation to come back.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Bye-bye.